We're slowly letting people into the room. Hopefully we get our good crowd here. We'll begin this program momentarily. Okay, and with that, we will get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Myers. I'm the director of the Berks Alliance, and we want to thank you for joining us today for what we think will be a very interesting and stimulating conversation about a very, very important project for our community. I'm going to turn it over quickly to John Weidenhammer, who's the chair of the Berks Alliance, for brief comments. John?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our program today. We really have, I think, a very exciting and important presentation for you today. I want to thank our presenters for the time that they invested in putting their presentations together. Also, I want to thank Dave Myers, who does really a terrific job of putting our spotlight presentations together, as well as our community conversations. I just wanted to tee this up by saying most of you know that the last train from Reading to Philadelphia departed in June of 1981. And since that time, there have been quite a number of studies that have been done about the restoration of passenger rail service. But in 2019 and 2020, the Berks Alliance undertook a study to really go in depth on the restoration of passenger rail service. And I believe that that study really created an inflection point that has led us to where we are today, which I think we're at a very important point in terms of really getting to the restoration of passenger rail service. I also want to remind everybody that this whole initiative is about more than transportation. Yes, it's an important transportation project, but it's a really giant economic development project that has broad-based impact throughout really the Schuylkill River corridor. But beyond that, for the people in Reading and Berks County, this is really an equity issue because to a degree, Reading has become an increasingly isolated city as we've lost other transportation options. And I think that the restoration of passenger rail really will provide a vehicle for folks that maybe don't have cost-effective ways to get downstream to Philadelphia and beyond to have that access to Philadelphia. So we're just really, and we now have a bus service that's being run by Amtrak, and the ridership on that service is really pretty encouraging. So fasten your seatbelts. I think we've got a great presentation.
A significant amount.
So just to remind everybody, if you can make sure that you've got
if you're making.
So Dave, I'll turn it back to you for
Thank you, John.
Introduction. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Let me cover the ground rules here really quickly. We do ask that you keep your camera on because it's always good to see that we're talking to real live people, but that you mute your microphone so that we don't get a lot of background noise. We will ask you to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions and comments. We will get to those after the formal presentations. We will then...
So we are doing in-place rehab, so the ADA units.
Excuse me. So we need you go back and do it again. Mute your microphone if possible. Use the chat function. We'll collect all the comments and questions, try to get through them. If we don't get through them all, we will share them with our presenters. And we will then share that information back with you. And our presenters have agreed that they will let us share their PowerPoint slides with you today, so we will do that. We will, as I said, record it, put it on the Berks Alliance website, send a copy of the recording to everybody who registered, and also send it to our friends at BCTV. So with that, it's my honor and privilege to call on Christian Leinbach, who is not only the chair of the Berks County Commissioners, but is also the chair of the Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority, which will be bringing our trains back. So Christian, to you.
Thank you very much, David. So let me clarify something right now. Yes, I'm at home. I'm in a recliner. I'm recovering from total knee replacement surgery just a little over 2 weeks ago, hoping to be back in the office next week. So hopefully that explains the environment that I'm speaking from this morning. I'm extremely excited about where we are in the process of restoring passenger rail service. And John, you alluded to it. For me, as an individual that's been involved since the early 90s with various efforts to restore passenger rail, the Berks Alliance study was the inflection point that got me back in and said, this could really work. Because every other study, has been initiated and run by government, county, state, etc., has been funded by government. And this is the first study that was initiated. No one from Berks Alliance came to the county and said, may we have your permission to do this? And not that they should have either. They said, we believe this is important. And as businesses, we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to fund it. Will you at least participate and listen to what we have to say? And I can still remember being over at the chamber offices with the initial presentation pre-pandemic and almost being incredulous. These numbers can't be right. But they did a great job. We are where we are today, I believe, in large part because of the work of the Berks Alliance. The second thing I want to point out, please write down this website, GoSRPRA.com. GoSRPRA.com. That is the official website for the Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority. All of our meetings are listed there. Minutes from prior meetings are listed. Links to attend existing meetings are all right there. The formation of the authority occurred in April of 2022 when all three counties, Berks, Chester, and Montgomery, unanimously voted to form this tri-county, if you will, passenger rail authority. It was formally recognized in June of 2022, and I won't go into detail, but by June of 2025, all three counties will have to reauthorize this authority in order for it to continue. That will be a reauthorization for an additional 47 years. A lot has happened. I'm not going to go through that. One of the big steps that we took early in our formation in the summer of 2022 was to hire an executive director. We were blessed to get an individual with a lot of experience in passenger rail, a lot of experience working with folks at Amtrak, people at the Federal Rail Administration, and hiring of Tom Frawley was a critical next step and has really been very, very good for our organization. I'm thrilled to have him on the team and really respect what he has brought to the table. And at this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to the Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority Executive Director, Tom Frawley. Tom.
Thank you very much, Christian. And it's a pleasure to be here today. And we're excited to share this update and hopefully have a productive conversation afterwards. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see. Okay, project update for today, April 25th. Oops, I'm sorry.
That was a quick show.
Yeah, I'm not sure why I went out of there.
You have to close it and reopen it, Tom.
Yeah,
You have to close
there we
it.
go. Yeah, it didn't.
We're still seeing a black screen. I'm happy to share your slides from my computer,
No.
if that helps.
No, there we go.
Got it. There it is.
Good.
Okay, so just a little bit about the organization. There have been some recent changes in the organization. You see here the board consists of 9 members. And in Berks County, which is the center group there, Commissioner Christian Leinbach, Mayor Eddie Moran of City of Reading, and David Hunter has joined. He is the executive director of the Berks County Planning Commission. To the right are the members from Chester County, no changes there, but to the left are the members from Montgomery County, and there are 2 new members in recent months. Commissioner Tom DeBello from the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners, and Mayor Stephanie Henrick, who's the mayor of Pottstown. They are new members of the board. Also down near the bottom right, you'll see Planning and Design Consultant AECom. They were hired they were selected in December and entered into a contract at the very beginning of March. Giving it's not allowing me to page here. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's just a quick recap about the corridor program, the FRA's corridor program. Consists of 3 steps. Step 1 is the step we are in now. That's the development of the scope, schedule, and cost, preparing a project management plan. This is funded up to $500,000. There's no match requirement. And that, in fact, is in place, and we are using that grant money right now. Step 2 is to prepare the service development plan. This is the next step. It does involve a local match. A 10% match is required. There's no ceiling identified. And step 3, also no ceiling identified, but a 20% match required. And this is to get into 30% engineering and design, what we call preliminary engineering or preliminary design. So just to reiterate, the acceptance into the corridor program includes the step 1 funding. So what does step 1 include? A project management plan, I mentioned. This is to define everybody's roles and responsibilities, how processes and procedures for maintaining schedule and budget, compliance with federal reporting requirements. Also a analysis of previous studies to see what materials are in fact usable in our statement of work and in the subsequent preparation of the service development plan. And the scoping tasks, actually to write a statement of work, a schedule, and a budget. So as I mentioned, we are currently in step 1. We've completed the project management plan. It has in fact been approved by the Federal Railroad Administration. We are now working on the statement of work, the schedule, and the budget for step 2. So starting step 2, which is the creation of the service development plan in the summer, this year's summer. I mentioned there are a lot of aspects to this. Route alternatives analysis. In the segment of the route between Bridgeport and Philadelphia, there are in fact a few alternative choices. Operating analysis. This is where we do computer simulation of operations to see what type of infrastructure improvements are going to be needed to provide both the capacity and the flexibility to accommodate our passenger trains while at the same time not adversely affecting Norfolk Southern's freight train operations. Ridership and revenue forecasts. Actually, the ridership forecast will be provided by Amtrak, who is our proposed operator. Capital operating and maintenance cost estimates. Benefit cost analysis. Most of you are aware for many federal programs, we have to do a benefit cost analysis. And then station planning and access analysis for the 3 initially identified stations, which are, of course, Reading, Pottstown, and Phoenixville. So the project timeline, sometimes it feels like time's not moving very quickly, but in fact, it is rolling right along. and the date line is the red line there for April 25th. So we are in fact in CIDP step 1. We are rapidly approaching step 2, the creation of the service development plan. As we get into early 2025, we hope to wrap that up and move on into preliminary design. You'll also see that the reaffirmation by the 3 incorporating counties that Christian mentioned earlier, that's shown there in early 2025. And hopefully by mid-2026, we will have completed the corridor program work, completed the preliminary design, and be going into final design and then ultimately construction and operation. So creating a service development plan. What's in a service development plan? I mentioned it earlier, goals and rationale, goals and objectives, identification and evaluation of alternatives. Planning methodology is specifically called out as a requirement. Demand and revenue forecasts, operational analysis, engineering and capital program, and public benefit analysis. I mentioned the alternatives analysis. This is a map. Thank you to David Hunter and to Rick Royer up at the Berks County Planning Commission for preparing this. You see here, once you are south of Phoenixville in the area of Bridgeport, there are 2 choices there. You can go down the east side or the west side of the river. The west side of the river is Norfolk Southern, continues down to 30th Street Station, staying on the west side of the river. If we go on the east side of the river, we would go through Norristown, which would be a candidate station to be added. And then in the vicinity of North Philadelphia, there are 2 choices. We can either get on the Northeast Corridor there, or we can stay on SEPTA and go through Temple University and the Center City stations, arriving at 30th Street on the upper level. So those are the 3 route alternatives which will be studied in the process of preparing the service development plan. We have to define what route we're going to use so we can do the more detailed engineering and costing and estimating work that corresponds with that choice. So next steps. We said we are in step 1 of the corridor program. We are anticipating wrapping that up in May or June. We're hoping to initiate step 2 in July. Hopefully complete that by early 2025. And step 3, which is the preliminary engineering or preliminary design stage, we're hoping to complete that by early 2026. And after we complete step 3, we would enter final design and construction. So priorities for this year, keeping on pace, on schedule with the CIDP steps 1 and 2, formalizing relationships with our host railroads, primarily Norfolk Southern, but not them alone. It could also be CSX or SEPTA, depending on which route ultimately gets selected. Further formalize our relationship with our proposed operator, Amtrak. Advancing financial planning. The funding that we have, we're very fortunate. We have the CIDP money, which could be on the order of a few $1,000,000 when all is said and done. We obviously have the contributions that the counties have made. We've also the benefit of 2 other grants, and so we do have money to accomplish what we are in the process of doing now. But to go further into implementation will require additional grant funding. So that's a very important part to be looking at for final design and construction. Institutional planning regarding long-term governance. It's kind of unusual to have a group of counties be the project sponsors through the operating phase. So we are going to explore other relationships that would involve potentially PennDOT and something that would obviously work with our proposed operator, Amtrak. And continuing coordination with the 3 municipalities, Reading, Pottstown, and Phoenixville, regarding their own station design and planning efforts, some of which we're going to be hearing about just a little bit later today. So I mentioned we have funding, although there is some local match requirement in the subsequent steps 2 and 3 of the corridor program. We have a Pennsylvania LSA grant that was awarded for $250,000 to Montgomery County. No match requirement, and this money has value beyond its face value, and that is because it can be used to match corridor program steps 2 and 3 requirements. Also, we have a congressionally mandated grant for $750,000, which was awarded to Berks County DCED through the Federal Railroad Administration. Also, no match requirement. Remember, federal funds cannot be used to match other federal funds, so this would have to be used in a subsequent step, for example, once we're out of the corridor program and into final design. So identifying future funding, remember I said step 3 is 20% match. Once we're beyond step 3 and out of the corridor program, we're at this point assuming a 20% match requirement will be ongoing. And there are lots of different sources available. There's Fed-State partnership. Hello? There's the Fed-State partnership. There's Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements, also known as CRISI. There are other federal grant programs. There's always the possibility of additional congressionally directed spending. And we have yet to identify, but there are various state programs that would be available as well. So thanks very much for your attention. And I will turn it back to David and stop sharing.
Tom, thank you. It's exciting, challenging, but exciting. Good news. Next, we want to move on to more localized things about what's happening with passenger rail. And I'm going to ask Erin Gantz to take on this part of the program. Erin is with the GRCA, and she's leading a work group that's been working on issues relative to the station location and the impact on the city. So Erin, to you.
Thanks, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. As he said, I'm Erin Gantz, Senior Director of Economic Development at the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance. And organizationally, we've been engaged in much of this process, but in particular, the group Dave is referring to informally started in 2022 as the Franklin Street Working Group to talk about what does transit-oriented development look like, and really looking at an approximate area. At that time, a station was not really honed in on, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it was really a preliminary analysis work that was undertaken by David Hunter's team at the Berks County Planning Commission, and realizing that additional expertise was needed to take this work to the next level in a little less than a year since this informal group had begun meeting in 2022, we successfully applied for a local share account grant through the state. And that was to take on a deeper technical analysis on train station location options, and then doing transit-oriented development planning around those narrowed down locations. So, and I just want to note that that application for those grant dollars was successful because of the collaboration with staff members at the City of Reading and County of Berks. And so through that process, we selected 2 consulting firms to take on this work. And I'm going to first turn it over to AJ Thakra with Stantec, and he has done the train station location analysis, and we'll share more details on where we're at with that. AJ.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to run through, as long as I get technology to work here, I'd like to run through where we are with the study, focusing on the actual location of the station, not so much the design of a station. That will happen later, but this is more of a discussion of the parts and pieces of where potential sites reside within the city of Reading. Let me move over to my presentation here. All right, where'd the share button go?
Yeah, it should be down at the bottom of the...
There we go, thank you. Okay. To presentation.
Good.
Okay. All right, so we originally, working from the information that was provided through the Berks County Planning Commission and David and his staff, they originally identified 13 stations or 13 locations, I'm sorry, within the corridor, the existing rail corridor for the town. And that's what you see here, basically an extension of 7th Street with properties on either side. Our role was to come in and further evaluate the various sites that you see identified, taking into consideration really 3 primary goals: one of location, one of cost, and the third of convenience for the community, really. So that is kind of the leading factors that we have been using as we've developed this. The first area of the study, the upper portion, was Walnut Court Street. And what we were looking at in that basic 3-block or 2-block geometry was the available spaces that could be utilized through either purchases or other availability opportunities, for the city. What you see here basically is a representation of the available space. We know that as we bring a train into the city, much as you are already accustomed to in Reading with the freight traffic that comes through, we understand, or we know, that there is the potential for blocking streets during the stoppage of a train. The dwell time will be relatively short compared to what would occur with a freight train, but we have to take that obviously into consideration. Here in the northern portion of the site analysis, we were challenged by the existing geography of the buttress walls, or the existing conditions that would present a challenge for bringing passenger rail in. And what you can see here basically is represented by these 2 dotted lines is that the existing bulkhead that you see here in the photograph is really narrow at 30 feet, and we would require somewhere in the area of 55 to 60 feet to make that happen. In order to achieve that in this environment would be extremely disruptive to property owners on either side of the right-of-way. So we were not keen on looking further at the potential for a station in those locations. So then we moved to the Penn to Franklin Street portion of the corridor, which is, I think, a far more dynamic piece of property that could certainly entertain the utilization and the use of a train station, a little more convenient for the activities happening at Santander Arena, as well as the adjacency to BARDA, and just the overall availability, flow of traffic, and just the different aspects that need to be taken into consideration. In this case, we're provided a much more open environment where we don't have to worry about the bulkheads that occur further up, and it will be a much easier opportunity to introduce a second rail back into the city, which was previously here in this right-of-way, but over time was removed. So it's, in an oversimplified way of saying it, we have the room necessary to make the station far more feasible and towards this location or towards this end of town. But while we were in the process of having those discussions, some of the other things that we had to take into consideration is the availability of services to the community, what would be the most efficient, quickest, easiest way to bring rail service back. And that led us to returning to the Franklin Street Station. We believe that from a initiation perspective, this would be a great place to bring the service back in while developing a new station, catty corner, at the BARDA site, just adjacent to the parking facility itself and the bus facility, which would make a multimodal station available to the community over time. So the idea of utilizing the Franklin Street Station initially would be in tandem with the use that is currently there, the Saccone Creek Brewery. We are not looking to displace them. We would work to develop a means of sharing space with them, just because of the various parts and pieces of what a train station needs are already there. We already have a platform. Yes, it would have to be modified, but it's already there. We have the ability to handle the traffic flow that would be related to that. We have the adjacency to the Bardis station parking deck across the way. We have also with that the adjacency of the through line service that is provided by Amtrak already being within the same location as well. So ultimately, where we are heading at this point is to initially utilize the Franklin Street Station, then in working with BARDA and the rest of the city agencies in developing a station parcel, I think here in this green space, which was the original intent, we've been told, when BARDA came in and built their facility, that ultimately this piece would be used for a rail station. So we are not suggesting to go down a new path or trying to find a new location, but rather utilizing what was anticipated originally, what was funded originally. So we think it's the best approach and the best use of the tax dollars for the community. That is my presentation at this point. So Aaron, back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, AJ. And this Franklin Street steering committee continues to meet on a monthly basis to maintain momentum and engagement around this work. And a larger group meets on a quarterly basis, and that includes several businesses in and around this area, including Saccone Creek Franklin Station Brew Pub, the Reading Foundry, etc. But something that's really critical that this group has discussed and continues to contemplate is what is the experience of a passenger both departing and arriving from these contemplated locations, and making sure that they're having the best experience possible. With that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to the Simone Collins Landscape Architecture team to talk about transit-oriented development, or affectionately TOD, because we love acronyms. So if you hear TOD, that's what that stands for. PJ and Peter, please.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time today. And we've had the pleasure of working in Reading for 25 years. That little sketch you see on the cover of our proposal, from which we were selected, is actually a sketch from the Schuylkill Valley Metro project that was done 25 years ago, and our office was a station designer. So we've had a lot of history in Reading, which we're very appreciative of, and we're really pleased to be part of this team doing this work. Next slide, PJ, please. So today, myself and my colleague Pankaj Javanputra are going to take you through a presentation. And as Aaron has said, we were retained by the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance to do this project. Next. Just real briefly, Simone Collins. This is our philosophy, and certainly mass transit fits into creating a sustainable and ecologically enduring society. So we're very excited to be part of this. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we've been working in Reading off and on for a long time. We're also presently working on the Downtown Reading Vision Zero Action Plan. That's an outreach of AJ's firm's work at Stantec, their strategic downtown project. And also we're working with Schuylkill Valley Greenways on a new order to renovate the section of the Schuylkill Trail between Buttonwood and Schuylkill Avenues in the city. So again, we've been lucky to work in Reading on a number of projects over a number of years. Next. So this assignment, when we wrote our proposal, seemed pretty straightforward and simple. It was to create TOD ordinances. And I won't read exactly the slide, but to provide these recommendations, because our role, of course, is advisory only to the city, which is responsible for enacting zoning or subdivision and land development ordinances. We knew we had to have a highly iterative process because there are a lot of folks that would be touched by this, and a lot of people and city council, planning commission, et cetera, need to understand this and sign off on it. And a big part of TOD, which we'll talk about in a minute, is it includes multimodal connectivity, sidewalks, bikeways, et cetera, which is one of the things we're working on, the companion study that I mentioned next. So we started back in September. Our schedule calls for us to finish up our work by the end of the summer. And we've had 2 meetings with the Planning Commission. The last one, which was last week. We just met with City Council on Monday, which was a good meeting. We had some good discussion, and we'll continue to do that. You'll hear that we've also met with area developers. We've interviewed other municipalities to see how they have handled similar issues. And as Aaron mentioned, we touch base monthly with the steering committee, and also quarterly with the larger Franklin Street Working Group. PJ?
Thank you, Pete. So what exactly is transit-oriented development, or TOD? Now, a lot of different organizations and planning groups have their own specific definition, but generally speaking, it's looking at that half-a-mile circle around your transit station, so around a bus stop or a train station. And a half mile is about like a 10-minute walk, and it's the distance that people are willing to travel for a trip. So go to a train station, go to a shop, go to a restaurant. It's that 10-minute walk. And within that half-mile radius, we have the creation of a compact, walkable, and pedestrian-oriented mixed-use community that is focused on that transit node, whether it's a bus stop or a train station. So that, in a nutshell, is what TOD is. Now, why is it important? What are the benefits of a TOD? Well, first, you have an alternate to driving. You have the presence of a new train, transit, so you're not inclined to drive. You increase your public transit ridership. And with that, you reduce your spending on transportation. Since you're more likely to take a bus or a train, you're not spending money on cars, on automotive repairs. And that savings could be used towards housing costs. And we know housing costs have gone up in recent years. So there's a cost savings there. You also emphasize higher density residential use. So the closer you are to the train station, the more residential units you can have. And with that, you create a critical mass of new residents. And that begets additional services, additional businesses, additional restaurants that can develop around that transit area within that TOD. And because it's pedestrian oriented, you create a walkable environment that can support those local businesses. So the residents that are living in that area, as soon as they get out the door, they can have a convenience store, they can get their clothes dry cleaned, they can go to the salon, they can get some groceries, they can go to a restaurant. The businesses are there and are supported by the community and the neighborhood that lives there. You also allow for new development in infill areas or underutilized areas. So these are empty or underutilized or vacant lots that we see in a lot of neighborhoods that can develop, that can spur additional development because of this influx of residents and money coming into the area. These lots can see their potential and have their best and highest uses realized and fulfilled. You also have additional streetscaping and landscaping that complement that pedestrian environment. So in essence, you're creating an outdoor room, that's enhanced by trees, by landscaping, by lighting, by buildings that are closer together, that create that and enhance that pedestrian experience and make it a safe and pleasant environment for the pedestrian. Now, some of the components that kind of build off those benefits and our best practices as well are looking at the building design first. So you minimize building heights on the outer edge, and you have taller buildings that are closer to the station. So it's kind of like step back. The closer you are to the station, the more dense you are, and the further out you go, the more spread out you are. You also have continuous frontages along the sidewalk. So again, you have that presence of an outdoor room where the buildings are lined together. There's no one building that's set back or away from the sidewalk more than the other. Everything is kind of uniform. And with that, you have an articulation of those walls. So instead of some blank walls, you have the presence of windows, of different building materials, awnings, additional streetscaping that kind of enhance, again, it works to enhance that pedestrian environment. You don't have those blank walls. You have some articulation that enhances that experience. You also have the presence of placemaking. So you can have public and private plazas and open spaces that are activated in these areas with events. So you can have pop-ups there, you can have food trucks, music, performances, play spaces, activities, performances, anything that also works to enhance that area. And that is also in tandem with some landscaping that is used to create that sense of place and that connection for the environment for that area. In terms of parking, you have on-street parking that's convenient for retail uses, but if you have lots, they're screened and they're off to the sides or in the back, so they're screened away from the station and softened with landscaping. You can also work to reduce the number of parking that's required because you're closer to a transit station, so you may not need that much parking. And if you do, you can also work with neighboring businesses and lots to share that parking as well. So parking is tackled that way in a TOD. This graphic kind of puts all that together here when you look at the benefits and best practices, and you're looking at the benefits on 3 levels. First, when you see the individual, you have housing choices that's suitable for all income levels. So you have a mix of apartments, of townhomes, choices in your housing options. You also have access to job opportunities. This could be jobs that are introduced by the new businesses that may develop in the TOD area, or that people go to by the presence of the train to different locations. You also have healthy and active lifestyles in that area as well. When you look at the community, you have additional housing density. You have social spatial equity with the options and choices that are available. You create a more robust economy because you have additional businesses in the area, and you have a sense of a strong and vibrant community as well. And with the environment, of course, with the presence of a train, you have frequent transit, you're reducing carbon emissions from automobiles, and that also enhances better air quality as well. Now, the next 2 slides, there are a couple of case studies in the area. The first is a development called Cricket Flats. Now, this is located in Lower Merion, Montgomery County, and actually received a Montgomery County Award a few years ago. The train station that's closest to here is the Ardmore Station, which is serviced by SEPTA's Paoli-Thorndale line, which is a very heavily used line in the SEPTA system. From Philadelphia, it's about 13 minutes. And the mix of uses here include about 10,000 square feet of commercial space and almost 80 apartment units. Now, the interesting thing here is that, as we talked about the benefits, you have a build-to line, and you can see the build-to line as it against the sidewalk. So everything is uniform. You have some articulation with the building. You have some streetscaping as well. You're utilizing step back. So as you go higher, say you go to a certain number of floors, the building height itself is stepped back in order to allow sunlight to come into that area. So this is an architectural technique that's used to, again, enhance that sense of an outdoor room and also provide that natural light to come in. And the lower levels also use the same building materials as the adjoining structures. Now, this is an example of new construction that's happening in this area when it comes to TOD. This next example is a mixture of new construction and adaptive reuse here. So what we're seeing, this is a case study called Sora West, and this is located in Conshohocken, also in Montgomery County. The train station is the Conshohocken station, which is a very heavily used station on SEPTA's Manayunk and Norristown line. The distance to Philadelphia is 40 minutes, and here the mix of uses include a 450,000 square foot office tower, a 127-room hotel, 2 restaurants, and a landscape public plaza. Now, when we look at zoning, the zoning of this district limits multifamily dwellings to 40% of the total square footage. So this is something that's worked with in ordinances and TOD ordinances and zoning ordinances, where you have a mix of formulas as to the amount of residential versus commercial. We also have an allowance for a public gathering space. So here it's 10% of that developable area is dedicated to that open space, that gathering space. And when we look at those best practices that we talked about earlier, we're seeing an adaptive reuse of the fire station here. Now, this is a historic fire station, and it was reutilized as a brew pub. So, when you go inside, you have those architectural historical elements that enhance the identity of the area, and it's repurposed as a location, as a brew pub that people can enjoy. And it fronts onto that public plaza, again, that public open space. Now, the opportunity here is you have a design emphasis along the streets where the pedestrian entrances are located. So again, you're creating that streetscape, that outdoor room kind of area that enhances the TOD. Now, with any sort of development, there are challenges and opportunities. The challenges here are keeping housing affordable. Now, this is important in a city like Reading. We want to make sure that as new development is introduced, as we see new housing, we want to make sure that the housing is affordable. Now we want to incentivize development only where necessary. Now, in order to see the things we want to see achieved, like the architectural standards, like the landscaping and streetscaping, we may need to provide incentives for developers. So we want to see those where necessary. We also want to plan equitably. We want to make sure that the people of all abilities and people of all socioeconomic backgrounds can enjoy the opportunities that are given by a new TOD. And with those opportunities, you help to reduce housing costs with reductions in parking requirements. As you're close to a train station, as parking minimums are reduced or stepped back, you reduce those housing costs. You provide those additional services near transit. Again, you create a critical mass of new residential units that are introduced in an area, which begets new services. So you have those as well. And you have a cohesive transit area character. You're almost like you're creating a new identity, a new brand of an area with the TOD that's specific to that area, with those high quality public spaces and new development that occurs in infill areas. So again, we have to look at these challenges and opportunities as we go forward with the TOD. Now, as we look to the TOD project area itself, which is located here in this circle, again, we're looking at that half-mile radius from the proposed areas that AJ just talked about. When we look at north and south, we're pretty much going from Buttonwood in the north to about Laurel in the south, and east and west, 2nd Street to about City Park, 11th Avenue, when we're going east and west. So this is the heart, the core of the downtown area. And some of the destinations here are the major destinations within the city, including City Hall, county offices, the Santander Arena and the hotel, the Barta Garage, the Goggle Works, a number of schools, businesses like the Saucony Brew Pub, the library, and other businesses, offices, and retail and personal establishments that people frequent in the area. So again, you're looking at the core of the city and the major destinations within the city as well, encompassed within this TOD area. When we look at zoning, we see that there's a mix of commercial zoning districts within the 2D area, such as the commercial core, the commercial residential district, and also the higher density residential districts. So these zoning districts already allow for the uses we want to see in a TOD, like apartments, like retail, like restaurants, like personal service areas, like conversions and adaptive reuses. They're already available here. So we want to build on the foundation of the zoning that's already present in the city. And as we began our process, as we were looking through the process, we wanted to get information from the heart of the matter, from the sources, from the developers who know about the land development process and the construction process in the city intimately, as well as planning professionals who work to write and enforce zoning ordinances that relate to TOD. So the list on the left here are a range of developers and architects we spoke to who are heavily involved in development in the city of Reading. And the list on the right are planning professionals from different cities throughout the Commonwealth that we've talked to who are engaged in this type of development as well. So again, they helped us out with the best practices they're engaged in, their involvement with the land development process, helping us gauge some ideas and how zoning ordinances and TOD is applied in their municipalities. So it's important to get their feedback. And as we move forward, we're also going to talk to, at the suggestion of the Planning Commission, cities of Lancaster, Harrisburg, and Scranton to get their ideas as well on this type of development. All right, with that, I'm going to turn back over to Pete.
Thanks, PJ. So as I mentioned, when we proposed for this assignment, we thought it was simpler than it was. And what we found out very quickly is it really turned into a two-step process. And coincidentally, the city planning staff was working on changes to the existing adaptive reuse ordinances, because common wisdom is with what I'll call a challenging market in Reading, it makes sense that, Reading has great bones, great architectural bones, some historic buildings, some beautiful buildings. So it made sense, and this was happening already, as you know. There was a good number of adaptive reuse projects happening in the city where existing buildings were being converted, let's say, from office uses to residential uses. And so we felt, and city staff generally agreed, that before new construction is going to be feasible, that adaptive reuse market has to be tapped out more completely. So what we started to do is look at the existing city ordinances with staff, and as they were revising them, and made some suggestions about how those adaptive reuse ordinances could perhaps be tweaked a little bit to make the development process a little easier for the private sector while still protecting community interests, which is really the role of city government. And then the second phase would be looking at new construction, how and where new construction could occur as that adaptive reuse market is more fully built out, and how best to approach new construction for transit-oriented development. Next. And the other thing that I think everybody agreed is important is to look at keeping housing affordable, especially as you get into new construction, because of the cost of new construction, nothing is inexpensive to build anymore. So one of the concepts that a lot of communities have tried, some with success, some with less success, is the idea of workforce housing. And workforce housing is a concept that rents are set between 50 to 80% of the area medium income, which is a standard set by HUD, for 5 to 10% of the total dwelling units on a larger project. And to get the developer to buy into that, there could be incentives that are incorporated into the ordinances to encourage a certain number of affordable units. And these are targeted to folks like healthcare workers, school teachers, police, firefighters, et cetera. So that's something that we want to work with the city on to encourage. And then another option, of course, is for the city to go out and look for developers who specialize in affordable housing as part of the TOD development in the city, so that as I think Tom mentioned, the transit, new transit in the city needs to be equitable, and that also applies to housing and housing costs. Next. So as I mentioned, there is already has been a number of adaptive reuse projects going on in the city, and this next slide shows some of those that have either been approved or built or under construction. And these are sort of flown out of the radar if you're not paying attention to this, but there's been a number of successful projects in the city that are adaptive reuse. One of them, the senior project, was an affordable housing project. So the city is quietly making progress in this front. And so if we go to the next slide, our recommendations on adaptive reuse were meant to maybe accelerate or be a catalyst to additional adaptive reuse. And city staff was very generous and very open to new ideas. We had a number of meetings with them, and in their latest draft that was sent to the Planning Commission and also over to the Berks County Planning Commission for comment, we agreed together to make some changes to the adaptive reuse ordinances that we think will improve and speed up a little bit the development process. Other things like the one-stop shopping or one-stop meeting process that the city has, we suggested maybe trying to make that mandatory. So we're still trying to talk about that, because talking to developers, sometimes it seems like there's just a lack of communication in terms of what's needed or what's required. So we think the one-stop process is great, and will further speed up the development process if communication is clear. And so as we go forward into the second phase of the TOD zoning work, where we're looking at new construction, we'll continue our conversations with staff and also go back to Planning Commission and City Council. And TJ is going to talk about that second half now.
Thank you, Pete. So speaking of new construction, these next few slides here are taken from Stantec's recent downtown strategic plan. And here they show infill opportunities. We talked about infill on lots that are underutilized or vacant, and opportunities on existing parking lots in the city to provide for those additional residential units or commercial establishments that support the residents and employees in the TOD area. And as you can see here, the certain areas noted in red where some of that infill development could go, like additional retail, like additional streetscaping, some residential units as well. So we're starting to see some of the infill happening in these lots as an opportunity. And this is just another example to show what can happen on existing parking lots. This is the block bounded by Cherry, Penn, and 8th and 9th. And here the graphic on the right shows a mix of retail, of residential apartments, and row homes, again, enhanced by those TOD elements like streetscaping, landscaping, public plazas. That can be an opportunity for infill on these parking lots. Now, one of the ways that can happen is working with the Reading Parking Authority, where they either sell or lease some of that surface parking for development. So the RPA would receive some revenue from the sale or lease while creating an additional demand for the remaining parking spaces that could be on lots or in the garages, which are currently underutilized. So again, with the TOD, you have the introduction of rail. We have parking reductions that can be introduced by standards and by ordinances. And with that, we're utilizing the underutilized spaces in the garages that allows for these lots to be developed with infill development to support new construction after adaptive reuse inventory has been used up. Now, the costs here may be more feasible after that adaptive reuse residential is built out. And with the discussions of the former director of the RPA confirmed this is possible. And we're also going to talk to the new director of the RPA as well to continue the conversation regarding this opportunity. So now we had our two-pronged approach for new development, for new residential and commercial development that Pete talked about with adaptive reuse and new construction. So the next step is to go ahead and create that TOD, that transit-oriented development ordinance. Now, right now, the good thing is, as I mentioned, the existing zoning already has provisions that encourage the TOD development and has those uses like apartments, like retail, restaurants, personal service, and the like. So that should stay in place. What we would do is create something called an overlay that adds additional flexibility and quality improvements that benefits the city and community goals. So what an overlay is, it's basically a layer of additional zoning that is applied to a specific location, and in our case, that TOD area, that's based on community goals, and those goals could be the benefits of the TOD, which are in addition to that underlying zoning. So the underlying zone still stays in place. So the CC, the CR, the R3, that still stays in place. This is just, quote unquote, a layer of additional zoning that's on top of that developers who want to develop under a TOD can apply. And the community goals, again, relate to the benefits of a TOD, like architectural design standards, like the landscaping and streetscaping, the street furniture that create that pedestrian environment and the outside environment, like additional lighting. Lighting is important. Lighting provides safety at night, and it can also enhance additional streetscaping architectural elements in that area. Outdoor dining as well. This is important. We saw this grow during the pandemic where people were eating outside and enjoyed it, the alfresco dining. This can be a permanent component of a TOD area that can help to activate any sort of civic plaza and open space, which can also be accommodated through additional programming like music, like events. You also have public spaces above the street level as well. So at street level, you have the traffic and the flow of the trains, of the buses, of the cars, but you can also have a public space on levels above street level that can be enhanced as well. And also, as Pete mentioned, the incorporation of workforce and affordable housing is important as well. So all this would be part of that TOD overlay ordinance. So we had that list of benefits that we wanted to see. So what would be the incentives for the private sector, for the developers? What would they need to provide these value-added benefits? So some of those incentives that could be incorporated into the ordinance include increased height and a smaller site area. So with this, you have the opportunity for additional dwelling units in a building or an apartment. Have an increase in impervious coverage. And impervious coverage is basically the surfaces that don't absorb water, such as like streets, sidewalks, rooftops, buildings. You can have an increase in that type of coverage. They can have parking reduction incentives, so they don't have to provide as much parking, so there are incentives for that. And you also have relaxed ground floor use standards. Now, typically in a mixed-use building, we'll see apartments on the second floors or above. Typically, the first floor is dedicated to commercial. But in this instance, an incentive could be additional apartments on that first floor. And then with that, having flexible ground floor commercial formulas. So if there are limitations on the number of square footage or space that a commercial entity could encompass on the ground floor, there could be flexibility in that where it could be larger or smaller depending on the building footprint or what else the developer wants to introduce in that building. Another incentive could be the allowance of residential units in the manufacturing commercial district. Right now, residential units aren't allowed. So this could be another incentive where a proportion or a percentage of a new development could incorporate residential units in the manufacturing commercial district. So again, these are some of the incentives that we'll start to look at as we go forward with that second step of crafting the overlay ordinance. And with that, that is the end of our presentation. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you both. Appreciate providing everyone an overview of what we've been working on. And can you just confirm, we're looking at a September timeframe for the TOD work to wrap up, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
Great. I'm going to turn it back to Dave.
Great. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, big team, for the presentations. Lots to absorb here. A bunch of questions that come up. I'm going to start with AJ. What is going to be the impact on traffic? You mentioned that that's a challenge at the locations you talked about, but what are we talking about in terms of what it could do to disrupt traffic? How often? How long would that take? That kind of thing.
The average dwell time in station for an Amtrak train is 3 to 5 minutes. So we're looking at very brief interruptions throughout the scheduled arrivals and departures. The actual timing of all of that will be figured out much later in an operational study with Amtrak to see when the arrivals and departures will take place within the city.
And I'm going to jump on Tom here quickly. If I remember right, the discussions with Amtrak have talked about perhaps, what, 6 to 8 trips a day?
Yeah, the number would change over the course of time as ridership grows, but probably 4 to 6 initially, and it could be 8, 10, maybe even a little more in the future. But that's probably about the same order as what we see now with freight trains passing through downtown. And they also occupy, even though they are not operating necessarily at a different speed in the middle of town, they are typically longer. And so they would occupy the station, the cross streets for a similar amount of time as an Amtrak train would when standing still, boarding or deboarding passengers. So it's not that different from what goes on today, just a little more of it.
Okay. And AJ, one other question. What you talked about using the Saucony Creek, the old existing train station. What would it take to convert that back into a train station? What would it be like? Would it get rid of the restaurant? Would it?
No. Number one, again, the goal is to be able to utilize the space wherein we would have to make it accessible, which would be the largest challenge in the equation. But basically what Amtrak would require is a place for people to be able to use facilities, restrooms, potentially a seating area. It's not likely that tickets would necessarily have to be sold there, so it would be a question of whether there would be a ticket office or not. But the biggest changes probably would be related to the platforms themselves and the canopies that are covering them.
So more external than internal.
Yes.
Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, David, I would also add it's attractive to have a station that already has a restaurant, and Saucony Creek has done an amazing job there. I think that this is positive, not just from the cost standpoint, but from the attractiveness. You have a completely restored train station that was built in the early 20th century. Dennis Loers, the late Dennis Loers, who was the head of BARDA, it was his vision. He was able to secure federal funds. And early in my first term, that project was completely restored. And Saucony Creek is the first tenant since that restoration. So I think it's not a question of can they survive together. It's the understanding that it is a huge value to already have them there and relatively easy to add that as a station. Think about it. If starting out 4 to 6 trips, that's 4 to 6 times during the day. There's an influx of people coming or going, and that's a value add for the restaurant.
No, good point. Good point. PJ and Peter, you talked about looking at other communities. What's the best advice you've gotten from some of the other communities? What communities should we really look at to replicate?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question, Dave. I think we got a lot of good advice from other communities, and they're all different, of course, and specific. I think one of the things that I think is very important is, we talked to City Center in Allentown and JB Riley, who's their CFO or CEO, and they've done about 12 really nice residential projects in the city of Allentown. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. And they have a NIZ there, Neighborhood Incentive Zone, which has provided critical funding for most of those projects that they've used for the garage development and on the ground developments as part of those projects. And he related to us that those new construction projects, even in a more robust market that I'll say in Allentown than exists in Reading right now, they needed that additional funding. And so I think that was eye-opening to us, and points to the need that in Reading for new construction, especially, there needs to be some help to the private sector to build these new construction projects. And I think it's common knowledge that the city is talking now to the folks in Harrisburg to establish some type of a CRIZ or something similar to that that would assist the private sector in Reading. So I think that's really important. And the other thing, as I said, each of the communities we talked to so far are doing things a little differently in each community. And I think the key is, and I think city staff has shown a great willingness to remain flexible in terms of how these developments how these ordinances are crafted, because we've got a dynamic market, as we know. We've got an office workforce that is increasingly either hybrid or at home, and so we have to be flexible. And so, if the current round of zoning and subdivision changes that the city staff has in front of the Planning Commission and soon the City Council, if that passes soon, I think the city has shown a willingness that in a year or a year and a half or 2 years, that may change again because the market's changing that quickly. So I think flexibility in how we look at these ordinances, that they're not cast in stone, but they always have to be flexible to change, to respond to the changing markets, is we've seen that a lot in these different communities.
Well, to that point, Peter and PJ, would the TOD overlay ordinance take precedence over the existing ordinances, or would it be bound by what the existing ordinances do? Could it affect what's happening on some of the commercial property, what's happening on some of the residential property?
Well, again, the reason we want to go with an overlay is that we don't really want to radically change the existing zoning. We don't want to change the zoning because that can be perceived by property owners as taking their rights away under that zoning. What the overlay does, hopefully, and the intent of it, is to give those property owners more choices for more and different things that benefit the city. Things like for new buildings, architectural design standards or streetscape standards that add to the placemaking that PJ talked about, so that the great bones of the city of Reading are reinforced through maybe richer materials or development. And so it's really not meant to take precedence. It adds to the choices that a developer would have.
So how could it affect some of that residential manufacturing property that's in the area?
Well, one of the things that we're going to explore there is, and it's actually one of the comments we got from the Berks County Planning Commission, or the city got from the Berks County Planning Commission just 3 days ago in their review of the proposed ordinances, is, they're asking the question, is it really appropriate to have residential uses in that manufacturing district? I think that's a very good question that needs to be discussed. The manufacturing uses, as everybody knows, under the MPC, the Municipalities Planning Code, every municipality has to allow for all uses in each municipality. So if with the overlay, we make it possible to have residential uses in part or all of the manufacturing district in that TOD area, question is that a bad thing? And I think that heavy, even light industrial uses in the downtown is probably less in demand than it was years ago. So I think that's something that should be looked at, because some of those properties are derelict. They're buildings, again, some great bones of buildings that aren't occupied right now, that under the right conditions might be able to be converted into residential or mixed uses. So I think it's something we're going to look at, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot with both the Planning Commission and city staff about that possibility.
PJ, you talked a little bit about streetscapes and moving people through the neighborhoods and stuff. How that area around the existing train station is fairly dense and fairly compacted. How are we going to, what would you recommend in terms of opening up the space to make it more green space, to improve the streetscapes, to improve walkability, moving people through the area?
Well, it's a good question, David. Thank you. I think with that, again, like you said, with it being more dense, we would have to look at some intuitive ideas for enhancing the green space. Sometimes you have things like parklets, or smaller green spaces that can enhance areas on a sidewalk. We see things like small parks that take the place of additional parking spaces. We talked about reduction in parking. Some parking spaces could be utilized by additional green space as well on the street level. So you have some of that incorporation of the green space. With lighting, you can have additional lighting features, different lighting features that also enhance that streetscape area as well. And you can have areas of small public gathering spaces. So some small pop-ups or smaller addition, like parklets, small civic spaces, they can have additional programming, whether it's like a food truck, a small food truck, things like that, that can enhance that area. So they're all, and we see a lot of trends happening as well in terms of these smaller scale things that can work within a denser environment where things are already built out, but you can then also enhance it with these new ideas that come into play.
If I can add to that too, David and PJ, that Aaron mentioned what's the experience going to be for the train user, and I think that's a really important question to address, which I think is implied by your question. And if the train station does go to Saucony Creek Brewing, the old station, we have that green space in back of BARDA. That was the original train station location, and it would be relatively easy and inexpensive to convert that into a really nice green space on that corridor. And even if it's even if a future station is there, it may be a good investment for the city and BARDA and other partners to do that, because that could be a really beautiful space that directly relates to the train station and also creates a really nice environment on that whole corridor. With our downtown active transportation plan, that's one of the corridors we're focusing on, 7th Street there, and that is planned to be to have new bike and pedestrian connections up and down that corridor, of course, which sort of is would have to be done anyway for the new train station.
So there are some options there. Would the recommendation be that there be specific designated parking lots for people using the trains, or would they park wherever they felt like park? Do you have any recommendations or thinking about that?
Not at this point. I don't believe we've necessarily identified any specific locations for designated parking per se, but we do know that there are adjacent facilities within a very short walking distance to the proposed locations.
So it might not be necessary to develop additional parking.
Correct.
I keep dumping on Peter and PJ, but is one of your ideas about adaptive reuse include building up, or would it be how to reuse the existing buildings there, and that would take priority over any new use, any new construction?
Well, again, what we're reacting to is and again, we're not market experts, we're just reacting to what we see, but it seems as though until there's a greater mass of new residential uses in the downtown in existing buildings, it may not make sense to be developing new buildings,
right?
Perhaps in surface lots owned by the parking authority as one option until that market's built out. So it's and also one of the things that's come up in the zoning review is Can you add to existing buildings? Absolutely. But that varies on a project-to-project basis.
A couple questions for you, Tom. You talked about let me get it right, the reaffirmation of the authority. What does that mean? And what's it going to take to do that?
I'll invite Christian to add to this, but the gist is under Pennsylvania law, when you create an authority, it has a 50-year life. But because there was so much uncertainty when this effort was started, the thought was, we'll do this in 2 increments, 3 years followed by an additional 47 with the reaffirmation. What that means is each of the 3 counties, all 3 of the counties must vote in favor of continuing the effort. Now, the good news is that we've had unanimous support bilaterally in all 3 counties up to this point, and we're optimistic that that will continue. And also by the point where that decision has to be made, and we're going from the end of the service development plan creation into preliminary design, we will have answered a lot of the early questions that people have about the character of the service, what it would look like and how it would operate and so forth. So we should be in a very sound position to be able to say, yes, it is in fact going to happen, and this is what it's going to look like, and there should be enthusiasm then to reaffirm. So I'm not looking at it as something negative. It's actually, I think, an opportunity to reinforce the positive things that have been happening and the positive support that we've been seeing from the counties. I'd like to, if Christian wants to add, I'm happy to.
Christian, go ahead.
David, I think it's very likely you'll see this on the agenda of each county either in April or May of 2025. I don't see anyone wanting to wait until the very last minute to vote for reaffirmation. I also can say, knowing the individuals that were elected, you have 2 new commissioners in Montgomery County, a new commissioner here in Berks County, and looking at that mix, everyone that I've talked to of the new commissioners, which is all the new ones, are 100% on board. In fact, Commissioner DeBello from Montgomery County, this is something he really wanted to do, and his colleagues appointed him to serve on the authority. So I feel good about it, but it was the right thing to do because we knew very little detail other than this is something we wanted to see happen. And we'll be in or close to the completion of phase 3 of the Carter ID program by the time that vote takes place. So a lot of that information is going to be readily available.
Tom, you had mentioned the next phase is the service development plans going to require some matching funding. Where would that come from? It's not a lot, but where would it come from?
It's not a lot. The step 2 of the program, which would be spring of or summer of this year through spring and summer of 25, is a 10% match, and we have a $250,000 local share account grant through Montgomery County that's available for that purpose. So that should get us most of the way there, and certainly through step 2, and I think well into step 3.
I'm going to sort of open this one up to everybody. There've been a lot of discussion about having met with county government officials, county government leadership organizations, meeting with the city administrative offices. I think you also had a meeting with the city council. How have those meetings been going? What are you hearing? Is there generally support for what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, David. I think it is imperative to understand that for Berks County and the city of Reading, this only works if the county and the city are working together. And we understand that. The city, both city council and the mayor have been very supportive. The mayor is one of our board members. I felt, and I think you know this, David, up front, I said one of these seats, even though this is the county initiating it, if you will, and making the appointments, one of those seats needs to be a city seat. And I advocated for that. The evidence of our support of the city is that seat belongs currently to Mayor Eddie Moran. So we're going to succeed when we work together, and we're going to fail when we choose to kind of go do our own thing. So that's going to be my continued message. We've got to work together. We are working together. And I believe the commitment is there that we will continue to do so to the point that we actually restore passenger rail service.
Good. Did there anything come out of the conversations with the city council, with the city agencies that is particularly significant?
I don't know how significant. I recognize that Councilman Jamie Baez had concern on the location of the station, Franklin Street Station, and ultimately the BARDA facility. And I appreciate the concern. It's very easy to look at the city of Reading and potentially identify some other area of the city that might need that development. But that's not what this is about. This is about looking at where is the core of the city right now. And when you look at one of the slides on the TOD, really showed it clearly. You've got the City Hall, the County of Berks County offices, the Santander Arena, Santander Performing Arts Center. You have the BARDA intermodal facility. You've got so much right in that area. This is the logical place to be. Penn Street is the connector to Penn Avenue that ties the other side of the river to the city of Reading. Penn Street's at the heart of this as well. So I don't think the selection had anything to do with disparaging any other part of the county, but rather focused on where the most logical place would be and the most cost-effective to do this both short-term and long-term. I think, and Tom, you can jump in. We've had a couple presentations with the city of Reading, and I think everything has been positive. I think the number one concern is we don't want to drag our feet, but we also don't want to rush ahead and make decisions that can create problems in the future. We're working to do this together and to have the right advisors and consultants. And I think you see that with our presenters today, including Tom Frawley, our executive director, that we have some very good people and good companies working with us, making sure we have the best information possible as we have to make critical decisions into the future.
I'll add one quick thing, transparency. We've been very adamant since the start of this effort to be transparent and open and answer questions. That kind of dovetails with education and awareness that obviously not everybody's going to be familiar with every technical aspect. You heard today a lot of very detailed information on all sorts of things, from grant funding to zoning, to lots of different things. And the idea is that by sharing all this information more and more, it makes everybody involved, all the stakeholders, county, city, others, more aware and having a better understanding of the framework within which we're all working. And we think that's been leading us towards a lot of a higher level of cooperation as well. So openness, transparency.
Good. There is a question that Peter and PJ, I'm going to ask you. Apparently there are already existing overlay ordinances and zones in the city of Reading. How do these relate to the proposal that you're talking about with doing a TOD overlay?
Yeah, I saw Linda Kelleher ask that question. Thanks, Linda. The Penn Street overlay is sort of unique because it lists uses that are not allowed at ground floor level along Penn Street during between certain blocks. So we are going to look at that. I think Some of that we might suggest some changes to, because I think some of the uses that are sort of prohibited right now would not be bad to be on some of those blocks, or certainly in the TOD. The riverfront overlay is something that was put in place, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, that to my knowledge was never utilized. So we'll look at that too, and we'll talk to city staff about that. If there's a reason to keep that in place, and I'm not sure there is anymore, but I don't know enough about it right this second to tell you, we would keep it, but maybe there's a reason not to have it there anymore. Again, that's a discussion that has to happen.
Okay. A question that I have to ask, because John Weidenhammer raised it. And PJ, this speaks to a little bit of what you talked about, but this is not just a transportation initiative. It's not just an economic development initiative. It's an environmental issue. It's a community development issue. Do you want to really briefly speak about key aspects of that and how that factors into your considerations?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, as mentioned earlier, we're looking at environment. We're looking at equity too. We want to make sure that this is equitable for all socioeconomic levels within the city. All the opportunities there, including housing. We talked about a variety of housing types, and Pete also mentioned affordable housing, workforce housing, making sure that there's an allotment for that, so that the people aren't priced out in the city and their community. So that's an important initiative for TOD development, having that type of element of housing. And also environment as well. You know, with the presence of a train station, you're not relying so much on the automobile and vehicles, you know, so you reduce carbon emissions, you reduce the footprint of the automobile, and some impervious parking as well. If we're reducing parking standards, some of that impervious can be translated or transformed to additional green space or public space for the residents and workers and the community to enjoy. So these are important elements of a TOD that we're going to look at and we'll incorporate into that ordinance as well, especially the equity for the community in a city like Reading. That's definitely important.
I do have one last question, but Aaron, do you have anything you want to say on behalf of the work you've been doing with the Franklin Street Working Group?
Before we all depart, I wanted to acknowledge that both of the train station locations are owned by the South Central Transit Authority, and I see Greg popping on and off with his video. So I just wanted to thank him for his collaboration and acknowledge that we have a really wonderful, willing partner in both of those locations. So thank you, Greg, and this will continue. I'm sure we'll have additional updates in the future.
So one final question before I let everybody off. We're doing all this planning. We're thinking about where the station's going to go. We're working with the other counties in terms of, when are we going to know this is real? How are we going to know this is real?
I'll jump in on that, David. The very few things are certain in this life, but that said, participation in the Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor Identification and Development Program was a critical step. Heretofore, programs or efforts to develop services like what we are proposing have been sort of ad hoc all around the country. And the idea was this program will create a single standardized approach to be applied nationally. You may be familiar, they had something on the order of 90 plus applications nationally, something on the order of 60 plus were accepted. They vary widely from additional frequencies or lengthening of existing passenger corridors to brand new corridors like ours, and everything in between. So lots of different types of projects, but there's a substantial amount of funding that's promised through that program, the CIDP, as well as, I remember I did mention other grant programs that would help us with implementation, so with final design and construction. And that funding availability that was created through the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that has really changed the game. So the fact that we're in this program, the fact that we are one of the very few at the very leading edge of the program, there are just a handful of projects nationally that are proceeding at the pace we are at this point. So and our project has been received very well by the Federal Railroad Administration. So remember, different projects are in different stages of development. Some projects are reasonably well advanced, like ours. Others, I might suggest, are more aspirational and would get implemented more slowly and in the future. So I'd say, given where we are, given the circumstances, given the availability of funding, the probability that this will actually be implemented and you will see service is extremely high.
So one more final question. Other than standing at the Franklin station and cheering when the trains go by, what can the people of Berks County, people of the city of Reading, do to help make this happen?
Well, there's obviously public support is very important, and not so much cheerleading on opening day, but cheerleading along the way in the form of, write your elected representatives, write the Federal Railroad Administration supporting the project that we, or not, when I say write, I don't mean necessarily a hard written letter, but it could be by email, it could be by telephone, but show your support and show support for those local elected officials at the county and municipal level who are actively supporting, either by participation on the board, as several are, or otherwise. I would invite Christian to add to that to the extent he would like to amplify that.
Sure. Very quickly, we've received positive feedback, but it isn't restored until it's restored. And we need the community, if you believe in this, either from an economic development standpoint, an accessibility aspect, environmental aspect, whatever it might be that motivates you to want to see the restoration of passenger rail service, let your state legislators know that you support it, that you want it, and let your federal legislators know the same. They're important because eventually this is going to become connected to dollars coming out of PennDOT at the state level and dollars coming out of the federal level, Federal Rail Administration, and other potential sources. But we have a lot of work in front of us. I've been asked, do I think this is going to be a reality? I am cautiously optimistic that within the next 5 or so years, we will see the restoration of passenger rail service here in Reading and Berks County. And when it happens, it will happen because, as a community, not just elected officials, people like Berks Alliance, the Chamber, average citizens that have come forward and said, how can I help? What can I do? It will be all of us, the city, the county, working together, that will bring this back. And look at all three of us, all three counties. I've never seen anything like this in my political life, where you have three counties adjacent to each other, each one with trying to restore a station, but each one recognizing we will do this and succeed when we work together.
Good.
I'd like to add one last thing quick, David. If please like us and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I know that may sound silly, but it does matter, because the number of people who follow and so forth is a statistic that we share with government officials and program officials as to the level of local interest. So that is important.
I want to thank all of our presenters. You did a great job. It's really terrific. I'm going to emphasize two words that I've heard today that I think are important and significant about what's being done with this project. One is the transparency, that people are willing to be open and public about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. And the other is the importance of partnerships and collaboration and how significant that is to make this move. So thank you all for the hard work that you're doing, and we will be there to help you. And with that, hope to see you at future events of the Berks Alliance, but we'll let you have the rest of your day back.
Thank you, David.
Take care. Bye-bye.